Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Cloud Computing. I am your host, Amanda Coolong, and I am joined in studio with, of course, my wonderful co-host, Mark Jeffrey.
Hi, everybody.
I'm excited because this is our Sweet 16. I need a tiara.
Oh, no.
I really want
to go there.
I have a star on my shirt.
No, we're not going to go there. We're not going to be like the obnoxious Sweet 16 party.
But it is the Sweet 16. I want cake.
Do we need like a big coming out party like they have on TV?
Well, maybe.
The obnoxious ones on MTV? Yeah. What is that? You know the show I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, that horrible show about all the debutantes that have the big, huge, crazy Sweet 16 parties. But that might be a good idea. Anyway. Because Mark will not give me a Sweet 16, I am looking for a new co-host.
Oh, that's the reason why? Is that why? Okay. Now I know what's going on.
So Mark will remain involved with This Week in Cloud Computing, but we are looking still for some additional folks to help out with the show. So if you're interested, send some info to amanda@thisweekend.com.
Yeah, we're really looking for someone who lives and breathes cloud computing.
Like Chris.
Yeah, someone like that. Yeah, anyway.
So there's that. Yesterday, we counted down the top 100 YouTube videos of all time, or should I say our wonderful Lon counted down the top 100 YouTube videos of all time.
Lon sat in this room for eight and a half hours, yes.
Oh my goodness.
So he started at noon on the dot, and we got out of this room at almost like 8:40, actually, to be more accurate, so. Yeah.
There's so many crazy videos. I just have to do this right now because after sitting in the office and hearing all of the videos, all I have to say is badger, 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 mushroom, badger, 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 snake. Sorry, I had to get that out of my system.
And now that it's out of your system.
And next week, stay tuned because I will be coming to you live from Maine.
Yes, we're going to Skype you in.
I'm going home to the wilderness, the wilds of Maine, and I'll be Skyping in, so who knows what shenanigans will ensue from that.
That's right.
I don't know. Quick updates in terms of conferences. Cloud Expo's coming to Europe, June 21st and 22nd. We will make sure that link's in the chat room. And Structure, which is GigaOm's Cloud Computing and Infrastructure Conference, is June 23rd and 24th in San Francisco. So make sure you register for those. I think we've already missed the deadlines for the cheap tickets, but they're still worth it. We've got some awesome sponsors, folks. We have Verticore, and we have Storm on Demand, and then NetDNA. Please thank our sponsors. They make this show possible. They've been with us since the beginning.
Please, thank you.
So at Verticore, at Storm on Demand, at NetDNA CDN. And of course, you can participate with us in the chat room. We've got you right up on screen so we can take your questions live here in studio. Make sure you throw those up. Follow us on Twitter at TweetCloudComp and use #cloud or #TWICC so we can follow anything that you say on Twitter. Without further ado, we've got some amazing guests today.
We do.
I'm very excited about our guests.
Killer episode today.
So we have joining us with we don't need an introduction with this one. I mean, this is the Director of Cloud and Virtualization Services at Cisco, Chris Hoff. So thank you for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you.
Happy to have you. And we also have Eric Chiu, founder and CEO of HyTrust, joining us on the phone for App of the Week.
Yep.
So
great show.
Going to be a great show. So let's jump right into it and get started with some news. Top story today, HP's cloud computing initiative is apparently going to cost $1 billion. I didn't do that right. I'm not Dr. Evil.
Like
$1 billion and 9,000 jobs, apparently. So lots and lots of chatter around this story today. So of course, what do we make of this? Are we entering, an era of more big layoffs or big layoffs due to cloud computing? Mark?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, again, more consolidation and more efficiencies. Terribly enough, in a way, those efficiencies are leading to less need for actual humans. So in much the same way, IBM is moving away from the services arena. A lot of people are. Cloud computing allows you to get rid of some of these jobs. Now, these people hopefully will land on their feet and end up somewhere else, just as good as where they're at right now. But I don't think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of thing, I think, as cloud computing continues.
Chris, given that Cisco is maybe a competitor, what are your thoughts on this one?
I couldn't possibly comment, but I will. Yeah, so I think, interestingly enough, it was described today as a bunch of restructuring for profitability. I'm not sure how much of that is actually allocated to actual cloud computing initiatives. I'd have to guess, which would be silly.
They're claiming it's for cloud computing.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, did they? I didn't read that part. I mean, it's kind of interesting news to hear it if that came straight out of the mouth. I mean, it's an unfortunate side effect of being more efficient, right? So as we get more automated, I think we're going to see certain jobs transform and roles shift, and that really underscores the need for folks to get a little bit more diversified in terms of their expertise and what cloud computing and virtualization as an enabler for a lot of the cloud computing is doing to our industry.
It's also interesting to note that they're saying it's going to cost $1 billion, but down the road it will save them $1 billion. So,
well, they have to invest in the hardware, right?
True.
And the bandwidth and all that stuff. So they got to build out the actual infrastructure for it.
But. Yeah. Eric, what are your thoughts on this story? Do you think it's the right approach?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's interesting to see that EDS has become a major part of HP. And I believe the cloud computing effort is centered in the EDS team. And EDS is a services company, and the big push that they're making in this direction is a sign that this is where HP wants to take its business.
Right.
And it's definitely a strategy that makes sense for that services side. And I'm not sure how much the layoffs have really anything to do with that part of the strategy.
I guess
it could be cloud washing the need to
cloud washing.
Yeah, I mean they may have decided to do these layoffs for another reason and cloud washed the reason why and said, oh, it's actually a good thing. So they're right. It could be
exactly.
That as
well. Yeah. Well, we've got another story here from Savvis. So they're an international provider of cloud infrastructure and hosted IT services. They've acquired a Canadian cloud services provider, FusePoint. So Yankee Group analyst Zeus Caravala, I'm sorry, I just love the name Zeus Caravala. Like, I want to meet Zeus.
He must be on Storm on Demand. No, just kidding. We'll say that for later.
So Zeus says, due to the fast-growing nature of the cloud computing and data center co-location market, this deal might well mark the beginning of a series of consolidations in the sector. So going back to consolidations again. Yeah. He said, look at how the telcos grew. They mostly bought similar companies, which gave them instant customers and a lot of best practices. As a result, the telcos have a lot of money, but don't do a lot of innovation. It's not that different in the cloud computing and services sector. This might mark the start of a trend of sorts. So do you agree with Caravala's analysis, Mark?
In short, yes. It's more consolidation. I mean, I actually don't think this is the beginning of the trend. I think it's right in the middle of it. We've been talking about it almost every week now since we started.
Yeah.
16 episodes in.
16
We've talked about it on almost every one. So, yeah, more of the same.
We do have a quick question from the chat room saying, what are the costs and what are the benefits or befitting parts of it? I'm not sure if this is in relation to this question or the last point. Can we get some more clarification from that, you guys, in the chat room?
I'd love to hear from our guests what their thoughts on the Savvis.
Definitely give us some more. Chris, what are your thoughts on Savvis's acquisition of FusePoint?
Well, first you bring up a competitor, now you bring up a customer, so that's awesome.
Of course.
Well, I think ultimately, build, buy, and ally are three very viable options anytime you're looking to either grow your capabilities, your customer base, and/or start fortifying your portfolio. And I think ultimately, when you look at what Savvis is looking to do and how they target their customers, it makes an awful lot of sense. And I agree with Mark that I don't really see this as the beginning of consolidation. I think we've seen providers who have emerged from the traditional hosting, co-location, outsourcing environment. Really, every time we've seen an inflection point like this, they've been able to take cash reserves, either and or trade in stock, and be able to really leapfrog some of the competitors who otherwise would be constrained in their ability to execute. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we'll see, as Mark said, a lot more of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting just how they're being smart about where they're acquiring, and expanding out internationally in lots of different areas. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Eric?
No, it makes a ton of sense. Both the geographic expansion as well as just showing strength within Savvis and growing out its cloud offering compared to some of its competitors. And it sounds like a great company from the profile, at least that I read in the news, in terms of 330 enterprise cloud and storage customers, and adding to Savvis's top 100 in the Fortune 500 customer set. and it's got strong, financial results. So to me, it makes a ton of sense.
All right. Yeah, I definitely agree with all of you as well. I'm just interested to see where the consolidations continue to happen, the acquisitions, consolidations, and whatnot, because we do see a lot of this on the show.
I think the pace will quicken.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone's positioning right now. So let's go to a topic that comes up a lot, Google. Now they're setting their sights squarely on the federal market. And we've done a lot of analysis on the show around the federal government's use of cloud computing.
Yep.
So that's something we'll get into a bit today. Google's now awaiting final approval on the FISMA certification process. So that pretty much means that Google apps will meet the same requirements that other federal IT systems have.
Yep.
So, and there are already about a dozen federal agencies, I think, right now that are using Google apps. So the question I want to pose today is, can Google unseat Microsoft, who's dominated the federal government for years?
Specifically Office-type applications.
Right.
So Google Docs versus Word, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Interesting, because we remember, I think it was just last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how Google was saying we don't compete with Microsoft Office or Word. Specifically saying that. We're just about collaboration. We don't want to compete. We're not a full-blown. And now here they are.
Now we uncover the fact that they're quietly sneaking into the federal government. So, yeah, I mean, Chris, I believe you'd probably have some thoughts on this one. Do you think they're going to unseat Microsoft in the government?
Well, as my favorite movie, Princess Bride, has a great line, and I do not think that means what you think it means. I've never heard quiet about their desire to penetrate that space. As to my opinion as to whether they'll unseat them, I think they have very distinct opportunities in certain application spaces, namely email being one of them.
Right.
The interesting part about anybody who's used these emerging online versions of tool sets that we've known to love and use or whatever over time is that we get awfully used to certain functionality and behaviors that when they don't exist in the online version become really, really annoying. So I run and participate in just a whole ton of groups that use all of Google's applications for obvious reasons. And as much as I enjoy and love that service, there are certain things that just really bug the heck out of me. It's part of that user experience.
Right.
And so besides the security elements and trust and indexing and privacy and all the things that we talk about there, I think the biggest element is usability and change. And when you see how non-integrated some of these products can be, I think that's where people are going to run into these user experiences. So even like in the city of LA, in the conversion rate between folks that were using, I think it was Lotus internally versus Gmail.
Yeah.
People complaining about their access, which has nothing in terms of speed, connectivity, which didn't have anything to do with Google, but had everything to do with their connectivity. They were complaining about certain functionality and integration with their directory services and such, and then the user experience of not being able to do the similar things like appointment blocking. And so I think that'll be one of the big determining factors in the long-term battle as to whether they can see this like-for-like functionality. And personally, and I underscore this personally, I can't replace my Office suite, unfortunately, with them, given what I want to do without losing more of my hair.
Yeah, when he brought up Princess Bride, I thought he was going to say, Microsoft, you killed my document. Prepare to die.
I was waiting for that one, too. I was waiting for that one, too. We have your friend Jason is in the chat room saying, oh, dear Lord, Google and FISMA, and then also that the government is very slow to adopt things.
This is true.
Very fair point, Jason. Thank you for that. Eric, what are your thoughts on this one? Is Google going to unseat Microsoft with the federal government?
Yeah, similar to Chris's thoughts, I don't see government employees as a whole moving from their Microsoft Office desktop app and experience to Google in massive force in order to unseat Microsoft. However, it's interesting to see a couple things. One is Google's push towards the enterprise, right? The fact that it is adopting this federal standard. And also the traction that is growing within the government around cloud, both in terms of its own private cloud efforts, but also in adopting cloud services. So It's definitely a set of events and changes that are happening that are fascinating. It'll be interesting to see how Microsoft responds. You know, Microsoft's been pushing a pretty big effort around Microsoft Office Live, if I remember the name correctly.
Yes,
but their hosted version of Office, and so, you know, maybe that's a wake-up call to Microsoft in order to, you know, change the way it does business in terms of making its applications more service-oriented.
That's a really fair point. It's just amazing how many different directions Google is going in right now as it relates to cloud. And, you know, we will be exploring this further. We will keep our eyes peeled in terms of inconsistencies in what they're saying, like today's. So keep your eyes open for that. We've got some news from Symantec. Their Norton division has launched its Norton Everywhere initiative. So it's aimed at bringing security protections and cloud storage access to Google Android and Apple iPhones. So the big point here is that PC-based access to cloud storage tends to be much more typical. So I'm curious, Chris, why don't we start with you? Why do you think Norton's expanding to Android and iPhone?
Well, clearly, as platforms go, they have quite a bit of mind share. I mean, I think ultimately I use services like Dropbox to do a lot of the synchronization capabilities that may or may not exist in the applications themselves, to actually kind of sync databases and files and move things around. And clearly, it's an interesting positioning platform play, right? Whether you're looking to expand traditional anti-malware, antivirus protection suite capabilities onto those platforms, or ultimately just really start to add new features and functions and expand their capability besides, getting into actual content distribution or enterprise penetration onto these platforms, which have traditionally lacked kind of enterprise management tools. They have a lot of suites, a lot of management suites that a platform shift like this would be affected by too. So, I think it's a kind of a natural evolution for any of those folks that would traditionally touch an endpoint of any type to move into the mobile space. And I presented at one of Symantec's events year and a half ago, talking about the impact of cloud and virtualization. It was very clear then that they recognized what the shift was going to do to them, and this, I think, is a natural kind of outcome for this particular model.
Okay. And Eric, what are your thoughts on this one? Do you think that, especially I'm thinking iPhone users, do you think people will actually take advantage of cloud storage with an iPhone?
I think they will in general. I think one of the things that's, really interesting to look at here is the fact that everybody talks about software as a service, right? The browser is the application, and you never have to install anything locally, and everything runs in the cloud. However, at the same time, you have one of the major shifts going on in terms of client-server computing, right? The client is now the mobile device.
Yep.
And instead of people thinking about the client being the desktop and laptop, the client's now your iPhone, iPad, and Android. And the move for Norton to protect that as a platform, as Chris puts it perfectly, is great to see this cyclicality happening yet again.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
The power of the mobile platform now, which is always connected, right? Whereas sometimes desktops and laptops aren't necessarily always connected, but these devices are always connected, and the fact that they're becoming such critical platforms that you now need to build a whole new set of systems and services and applications around to provide that level of functionality.
Right. Okay. I just saw another message from Jason in the chat room about Trust Digital was acquired for mobile security stuff as well. So we've got some links in the chat room there if you guys want to grab them.
Yeah, actually, Nehemiah, too, has an interesting point. I've been thinking the same thing while I've been listening to this. Norton has traditionally made its bread and butter on the weaknesses of Microsoft Windows.
Exactly.
And I'm not so sure that the iPhone, the iPad, and Android devices share those weaknesses. On the other hand, it is correct that Norton must move. There is a shift going on in the client-server paradigm. It's already happened, arguably. And Norton must move to those new devices or perish. So I think that they figured that much out. I don't think they figured the rest of it out. Like what kind of value do they add? They can't add the same type of value that they added in the past, I don't believe. So it remains to be seen what they will do next.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to keep our eyes open for that one. This last story, surprise, surprise, is all I have to say about this. We're still not comfortable with software as a service. Imagine that, Captain Obvious. There's a new survey out from Forrester Research that says security is the top reason preventing firms from moving to software as a service. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
So the principal analyst behind it, Liz Herbert, shares specific security concerns include everything from physical security requirements for data centers to logical security and identity management to a lack of robust security standards. So, Chris, I will toss this one to you. How important are security standards for SaaS and cloud?
Security standards. Well, how about a common way of expressing what security means within the various delivery and deployment models of cloud, not just SaaS? I think that's the biggest problem. It's very interesting to me that within the context of this discussion, people bring up and highlight SaaS as something they're uncomfortable with, since regardless of whether you called it SaaS 3 years ago, we were making that transition and move to those particular types of services, whether it was ERP, CRM, mail, any type of hosted application and platform, and now that it's called cloud, people run away shrieking. You know, what's kind of puzzling to me is in many cases you are dealing with a duality of description between SaaS being offered up as a much more secure platform versus one that you know, in the middle you know, plagues you with lock-in, and on the other side is haunted by stories of things like Magnolia, where it was actually, you know, a single server on some guy's desk that goes bye-bye. You know, the reality is probably a mixture of all three, and anybody who's afraid of SaaS ought to be afraid of any type of service, and, you know, performing diligence on any manufacturer provider as it relates to what they do and how they do it is going to be critical. I think in the long term, however, the trouble we've had is being able to uniformly ask relatively the same sets of questions across providers, such that we can compare and contrast their answers above and beyond something like a SAS 70, in which case a provider can essentially say, we do nothing, and then they pay an order that says, that's right, they do nothing, but they don't actually have to describe any of the things that actually they do or don't do. And then the transparency or lack thereof of some of the things that they say that they do or don't do based on policy has yielded this kind of weird uncertainty. You know, I lead a project that is kind of built around bringing some of that transparency back to both software, platform, and infrastructure service called Cloud Audit.
Right.
I know we're spending an awful lot of time with cloud providers trying to figure out what it is they feel comfortable with exposing that doesn't put them in a dangerous position, but at the same point in time feeds enough information back through transparency and visibility to the people that have these concerns, so that we can get past this.
Gotcha. Eric, what are your thoughts on this one? I mean, transparency obviously is key here. Would you agree with Chris?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, transparency is key. The other thing is, you know, a lot of enterprises, when thinking about hosting sensitive data in the cloud, whether it's with a SaaS provider or infrastructure as a service, et cetera, you know, they're also looking to some sort of, you know, body or some sort of authority in order to help them determine that that is a safe move to make, right? And we're starting to see those efforts happen. I just published an article or, you know, a short post on the fact that the PCI Security Standards Council is coming out in October with a new rev of PCI DSS, which is expected to call out virtualization and cloud specifically, and describe what needs to be in place to host PCI applications. And, you know, that's definitely a step in the right direction where, you know, companies today, and we hear it all the time, you know, are either not taking those applications to the cloud or virtualizing them, or if they are, right, they're somewhat subject to the judgment of their assessors, and that leaves them a bit exposed in terms of, you know, what that assessor is going to, you know, call on in terms of, you know, whether they're compliant or not. And so some of these areas where they are being better defined, you know, will really help with people in terms of enterprises being comfortable in adopting cloud-related services and technologies.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to, Chris brought up an interesting point. Magnolia, for those of you who are not familiar with Magnolia, they were I guess they still are, but now defunct, bookmarking service, much like Delicious, et cetera. And they very famously lost all of their data. They one day just basically said, sorry, we've lost all of your bookmarks, everyone. We're trying to get them back. They were not a cloud. They weren't using software as a service or any cloud services. They had their own, I don't exactly know what it was, but I know they had their own data center or their own computers. It wasn't like they were using somebody else's service. So they very famously lost everything. Ostensibly, if they'd been using someone else's cloud platform with redundancy, et cetha, they would have retained that data. So that's sort of the flip side of the equation. I think every CTO on the planet looked in horror at Magnolia when that happened and said, "Oh my God, there but for the grace of God go I." So
in other words, a little bit skittish, thanks to things that have happened in the past.
There are two sides to this story.
Yeah. Well, I think that about wraps up the news. I believe we have some storm clouds rolling in.
I believe you're correct, Shield Maiden. I feel my voice deepening. I feel my muscles growing, like this guy right here.
Storm
and this guy. Storm on Demand. Storm on Demand is an infrastructure as a service, cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace large dedicated servers. A proprietary cloud platform that was designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers, with over 12 years of experience. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, superpowers, cool outfits, including storm hammers. No, not really. And pay-as-you-go, utility-style building. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, the ability to fly, Debian, CentOS, the ability to breathe underwater, fully managed servers, private networking, and much, much more. Storm on Demand can be found at stormondemand.com. Storm on Demand. When you need a storm.
Hey, I'm going back to Maine, and we have storms back there.
Storms
so
not on demand.
We'll have storms on demand.
In New England, it's very much about the not demand.
Demanda demands storm on demand.
You'll get a storm, I'm sure of that.
Storm on Demand on Twitter. Make sure you check them out, everybody. Well, without further ado, I would love to get into a discussion with one Mr. Chris Hoff. So, Chris, I'm going to pick on you for a minute here, okay? So, your one-line bio says, Chief Security Strategist, Architect, CISO, Security Visionary, and Evangelist Prophet, Bricklayer, Priest, and Short Order Cook. And I had to bring in my copy of The Book of Ultimate Truths by Robert Rankin, who is a favorite English author of mine, very much akin to Douglas Adams. And, well, this is what you remind me of. Ready?
Yeah.
He had known many previous incarnations, and then some. He had walked the earth as Nostradamus, Uther Pendragon, Count Cagliostro, and Rodrigo Borgia, although probably not in that order. He spoke 17 languages, played darts with the Dalai Lama, and shared his sleeping bag with Rasputin, Albert Einstein, Lawrence of Arabia, and George Formby. He was worshipped as a god by an East Acton cargo cult, and once scaled Everest in a smoking jacket and +4s to win a bet with Oscar Wilde.
He's basically this guy.
That's you, right? I think that's you.
Wow. It's I'll have to steal that from you one day. I feel like the guy.
I will share.
The Dos Equis man. I do not do well.
That was the other thing I was going to use.
The most interesting man in the world.
The most interesting man in the world. So without further ado, yet again, founding member of Cloud Security Alliance as well, so I want to jump into that. But you're a security maven who was one of the early responders to cloud technology. So what I'm curious about more than anything is what attracted you to the cloud? Why did you become this person to speak out against the, or not against, but
for the cloud.
For the cloud.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, actually. It's a slight case of schizophrenia. And before I answer that question, I'd like to suggest that Eric is a far smarter man than I, because his picture has like this really noble, shot up from the chin, standing with his hands on his hips.
He's laughing at you in here right now.
Oh yeah. No, I know. I have my winter coat on and a black eye from jiu-jitsu, and and this is my version of Nick Nolte's mugshot, it seems.
Hey, Chris, that's how I stand every day.
I know, Eric.
That building every day, host my meetings there. Given that I don't have that great storied history, I have to find a different way of getting respect. So it's got to be around image.
Yeah, you're like the Yule Brenner of cloud. I get it. All right. So anyway, what was I
These two are
saying?
close friends, if you couldn't tell, or they know each other well.
What was the question? Oh, something. Right. So I generally tend to pick on technologies, and I mean that in a good way. About 3 to 4 years prior to kind of mainstream adoption. So the same thing happened with virtualization. I wrote this funny little ditty called the Four Horsemen of the Virtualization Security Apocalypse. It was an uplifting presentation, but it really kind of points out the industry and IT's kind of lack of good timing as it relates to seeing how disruptive innovation is going to impact us in time enough to develop solution sets in the security space specifically that let us get our arms around solving problems. And so I have this thing called I stole it from my friend Andy Jackwith. I adopted it, but I call it the hamster security sine wave of pain, which is really this kind of representation of how we choose to deploy and adopt technology over time and respond to disruptive innovation. And usually we're about 180 degrees out of phase. So by the time we're focusing on things like network-enabled security or information-centric security, the particular type of disruption like, let's say, virtualization or cloud computing forces us to actually go back to putting more and more controls in the host as opposed to in the network, because the network gets abstracted and vice versa. And that's kind of where we are today with cloud and virtualization. So not necessarily in that order, but so what drew me to virtualization and then ultimately cloud was as we go through these cycles where the nature of the network, which is the kind of constant in all of this, tends to change its role, how we as a community and an industry we're going to handle deploying, even tactically compensating controls, how we operate and do what we do and why, versus kind of focusing on the things that really matter, became really annoying to me. And so I wanted to point out again that each time we have one of these shifts, right in the middle of it, we talk about we should focus on the things that matter, the information. We should really, if we protect that, then whatever platform, hostile, friendly, dynamic, mobile, static, really shouldn't matter that much. But we unfortunately don't get the opportunity to. So that's kind of why my wrath, my interest, my focus, my love, my time, and attention has been focused on virtualization and cloud.
Makes sense. I guess you should focus on what you're passionate about or what annoys you.
Yeah, sometimes a bit of both.
Thing I wanted
Chris, are they coming after you?
Yeah,
we've got some fires, I guess, nearby. So
we sometimes get that.
Don't you like our sound effects in studio? Come on.
So I have a quick question.
Sure.
So Chris, you're a founding member of the Cloud Security Alliance, which we touched on earlier. Now we've talked about the CSA.
Yeah.
And there seem to be a lot of these. The CSA seems to be the major organization that we hear a lot about. The question I have is, there's a lot of things we're hearing come out of it. What I can't really seem to figure out is it addressing the perception of things are actually fairly secure, and we need the Cloud Security Alliance to address the perception? So it's essentially, I don't want to say propaganda, but propaganda thing. Or is it really more nuts and bolts in terms of defining standards across the entire industry? If you are going to be a cloud provider, you must use this type of security on your network, and basically very nuts and bolts things like that. Which would you characterize it as, or is it something else?
Kind of a little bit of something else. So the CSA is not about crafting standards. It's we will leverage existing standards or developing standards and help influence them. But the Cloud Security Alliance, the first mission we wanted to accomplish was in delivering the guidance, and we're up to the second rev of it, but the guidance to really help people understand in three critical macro categories: architecting the cloud, governing the cloud, and operating the cloud. And in what was originally 15 and is now 12 areas of concern or focus, in how things are different and how things are the same, how ultimately you can evaluate the impact of what cloud computing has on those particular elements and areas, and how those areas are in turn impact cloud computing. So the first goal was to really level set folks who were coming face to face with somebody saying, thou shalt cloud, and not really understanding what that meant operationally from a governance or architecture perspective. And we accomplished that. And I can't tell you how many Fortune 100 companies I've walked into. Well, there's only 100 of them, so it's a good amount of that. But who whip out this guidance and say, hey, look, this has been a great help. And so now the kind of next steps in a continuum of what the Cloud Security Alliance is doing is really working across other organizations and initiatives to push the adoption beyond just the kind of kick the tires approach, but how you can actually get into cloud computing in its various delivery deployment models in a way that allows you to manage risk appropriately and really take those next steps and get you in touch with various certifications and standards and expose folks who would otherwise have a hard time getting their arms around stuff. So we have a lot of cross-functional and cross-organizational work going on right now. Stuff we've done, for example, in new deliverables like the controls matrix mapping tool that we've released, partnering with the IEEE in terms of a trusted cloud initiative, looking at identity, basically making sure that as we approach these security concerns, that we take a very wide view from the practitioner to the CIO to the CTO to a guy who operates an IDS console, and ensure that all of these constituents are spoken for so that they understand what cloud means to them and vice versa.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
One thing that you've talked about a lot, Chris, is the 3 models of security in the cloud. You say security in the cloud, for the cloud, and by the cloud. So can you explain those, and why is it so important to differentiate between them?
Should do that in the D'Artagnan voice, I guess. Well, I think what's interesting is I like to chop stuff into easily consumable models, and so from the perspective of in the cloud, it's really how do we. So the in, by, and for the cloud model came from a similar model I did with virtualization. That basically said it focused on virtualizing security, which is how do I take operational practices and technology and apply them in a virtualized environment, meaning what changes. So how do I take my firewall or IDS or IPS and operationalize those in a virtual environment? The second category was securing virtualization, which is then if I'm going to deploy virtualization, what do I have to do to actually secure the underlying platform and the operational and technical shifts and organizational shifts that happen there? And the third category is security through virtualization. What benefits I gain by deploying virtualization that I couldn't do in a physical environment? So I applied the same concept to cloud, and what I ended up with was security in the cloud, which are the tactical implementations of the same types of solution sets, firewalls, IDS, IPS, DLP, etc. Security by the cloud, which are services delivered by using cloud as a platform in any of the delivery models, SaaS, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. And then security for the cloud is actually using and leveraging overlay cloud services. So you have one cloud sitting in front of another cloud, providing, for example, let's say, antivirus, anti-spam, DLP services to somebody who may provide mail, or maybe even something like web application firewall cloud services sitting in front of web farms. So that model gives people a way of kind of taking apart the service consumption and delivery models and understanding how they work a little bit easier.
Another thing that I thought was interesting is you've also said that you can't secure the cloud and you don't need to. So explain that one to me.
Well, let's dovetail back to that question we had about people's fears of software as a service.
Right.
In software as a service, you look at the delineation between what the cloud provider is generally responsible for and what the consumer or customer is responsible for. Short of provisioning users to allow them access to the SaaS service, basically in software as a service, you are essentially contracting or writing in your security requirements, service level requirements. There's really not much, if anything, you do. So, when you talk about securing the cloud, what does that mean in a SaaS application? As you go down the stack, there are elements that you are responsible for. And when I talk about securing the cloud, I'm talking about cloud as a platform. In infrastructure as a service, you are just as responsible for managing the operating systems and applications as you were in your own data centers in the physical world. But the underlying platform, you don't get to see, you don't get to touch, you don't get to have any impact on your ability to secure it. And so when I talk about you can't secure the cloud, my point is, again, if you go back and focus on the things that you should be worried about, your information, your applications, those are the things you have impact and domain over. Those are the things that you can secure. Your cloud provider, if you've chosen somebody, you better have done diligence to understand what they do to secure the underlying platforms. But for the most part, you'll find that in infrastructure as a service, they maximize out of the three-legged stool that is security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Infrastructure as a service providers maximize availability. They provide you a platform that is up and running. The rest is really up to you. You can screw it up with as much scale as you like. Platform as a service, you get some added benefits of being able to do things like enforce or prevent stupid human tricks in programmatic libraries by not introducing by not introducing, for example, buffer overflows, being able to enforce entire type safe libraries in terms of how you program, and then software as a service. You're kind of hoping that they've done a good job, soup to nuts. But I say you can't secure the cloud. I'm talking about cloud as a platform, cloud computing. We need to focus on, but cloud as a platform, not so much.
Right. That kind of dovetails into the next thing I want to talk about. You recently wrote about the DevOps movement. So, quick plug for your blog. It's Rational Survivability. Lots of good stuff on there. But you mentioned the DevOps movement. What's it about, and does it make sense for people who may not know about it?
Oh yeah. So this has been a great.
Have I opened a can of worms for you?
Yeah. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Actually,
it's my job.
Good. You're doing a good job. The great thing about the last blog post was, and it's a secret to blogging, by the way, that I'll give to everybody. Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
But if you title a blog post "Incomplete Thought" and then make sure you leave out about 10 really important points, what you'll find is that everybody will point out the fact that you left out those really important points, but they'll start to participate. So you get awesome comments back.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it kind of sucks because it makes you look like a toadstool sometimes, but it encourages collaboration. So, I'm a giver, so I do that.
I didn't know we were going to get blog tips on here, too. This is great. Multi-talented man, apparently.
Well, I am.
Jiu-jitsu, tattoos. Oh, and you were also named on a top 10 list of sexy InfoSec geeks.
He's the most interesting man in cloud computing.
Yeah, there's that too.
And he's also known as Father Cloud. We just have to pick on you.
Let us not forget, besides the top 10 sexiest InfoSec geeks, I was put on the top 10 leaders next to Mark Benioff and Larry Ellison, the all-time.
I did see this.
Wow. Hey.
Yes.
He's not kidding around.
No, not at all.
I forget what I was talking about. Oh, anyway. So DevOps, very interesting topic to me because very misunderstood depending upon who you're talking to. And ultimately, if you look at the comments of that post, that latest post on DevOps, what you find is that at the end of the day, it's really about not so much developers becoming operators and writing security into code and not worrying about infrastructure. As is communicated by some of the leaders in this space, it's really about embracing all elements of the business. From an operational, development, IT, leadership perspective. And it's about as much culture and tools and advancement and automation as it is all of the other things I described. But in many cases, how it's interpreted, especially by the security community, is that, we're going to get all these developers who know nothing about security now bypassing security in the network teams and going straight to operating infrastructure in this dynamic, automated way, and this guy is falling. And quite honestly, the way it was painted, that's the way I originally reacted. But I listened and I watched a bunch of presentations and I interacted with a bunch of folks, and I found that was only one piece of this puzzle. And so what's very interesting is it's kind of like a little bit of a Renaissance movement as it relates to taking better responsibility and ownership of serving the business and delivering service. One that I totally grok. And so, as I summed in the post, it's not so much the message that is the problem. To date, it's really been the messaging. The notion that in many cases, it's painted like in some people's presentations, not all. But that developers have evolved to this enlightened state using Agile, and they're just they're awesome sauce, and you operators suck. You squirrel away Perl scripts, and you don't tell anybody, and crap breaks, and it's all your fault. That's not what they mean to say.
Right.
Some people, well, that's not what everyone means to say. Some people say that, but it's about getting visibility, transparency, community collaboration, and much better diligence and into the entire process. And I laud it. So I'm glad I could take one for the team and look like a toadstool to
I like toadstools. I'll be seeing plenty of them when I go home to Maine next week.
You will.
I'm in New England. I see them every day.
I will have to look you up when I get over there.
Yay.
Okay, I love that. This is a great show. We've got stand-up in here.
I know.
Another quick one, because this leads into this discussion we'll be having with Eric to some extent. Many infrastructures as service providers are reevaluating their choice of virtualization platforms. So you've said that cloud providers who are hobbled by architectural designs that constrain network security, virtual appliance deployments will suffer. Explain that one.
Well, I made a comment earlier that a common thread in our discussions about paradigm shifts has always been the network or representation thereof, and we go through various iterations. And so the network, moves from being hardware focused to hardware and software focused to, in some cases, software focused, like we're seeing today in mass market infrastructure as a service cloud providers, where even though we have underlying infrastructure, the provisioning of how your virtual machines attach to your quote-unquote network is really mostly a function of software. The physical pipes are used to move bits between them. But what's happened is that many of the platform choices associated with how the network is defined and implemented is very much a trade-off between performance in terms of raw I/O, your ability to extend and configure more complex either virtual and or hybrid virtual and physical network infrastructure topologies that suit your applications. Because in many cases, what's interesting is the public cloud computing, kind of the Amazon Web Services model, really suggests that to take full advantage of that type of service, you need to rewrite your applications. Okay, and that's a big bite to take. So in many cases, what you see is the emergence of what might be classified as enterprise class cloud or cloud providers who have a virtualization platform that has emerged and grown up a little bit into being a cloud platform that provides very similar networking capabilities between what you can do in an enterprise. So if you don't have to, at least initially, rewrite your applications to move them off of your infrastructure to somebody else's, while you think about moving in the long term to either public cloud or a hybrid model between your own private or public cloud, that's goodness for an enterprise, because in many cases some of these applications can't be rewritten. Some of the people are dead. They just they don't exist anymore.
True.
So, we've used virtualization to get over that for the most part in many cases on x86 platforms, for example. But the networking, the definition of where, what, and how the network functions really has a dramatic impact on the types of security models you can invoke, the types of compensating controls you can apply, and how. And so when you look at like only having a single interface on an Amazon EC2 instance versus Rackspace, where you can have two, or maybe a Terramark or a Savvis where you can have more because of the platform difference, and you can integrate more flexible virtual switch configurations. This gives people options. And those options, even though it may cost less over here, if it means that in the long term I'm not squeezing the balloon and having to invest so much more in software rewrites, I might choose to put it over there.
This is true.
Sorry, that's a long answer, but that's...
Hey, we like long answers because as long as what you're saying has some good content.
That's right.
Oh, well, I'm not the judge of that.
And on that note...
You guys can sing along if you like, by the way. This is a sing-along commercial, so feel free to jump in. Your cloud hosting provider letting you down. Take a look at managed clouds from Verticore. A private managed cloud solution that can easily replace your current IT infrastructure and eliminate IT pains. Avoid the cost and hassle buying and maintaining IT infrastructure and software. Deliver 100% uptime to end users. Configure and deploy competing resources in just minutes. How, Amanda, do you know? With Verticore, oh Verticore, you should be using Verticore. Verticore, oh Verticore, you should be using Verticore. With Verticore, your private cloud is hosted in an advanced and secure data center, which uses only best-in-class hardware and software and gives you access to scalable bandwidth. Verticore's team of experts monitor and maintain your cloud 24/7 by 365. With Verticore, oh Verticore, you should be using Verticore. Verticore, oh Verticore, you should be using Verticore.
My.
Thank you. Verticore.com.
On that note, that was quite a note.
I figured a little heavy metal ending this
At
week.
Verticore on Twitter. Make sure you check them out. Well, folks, I think it is about time for App of the Week. And now we are back. App of the Week. We have Eric Chiu still with us, founder and CEO of HyTrust. And also a quick thank you to Chris. We still have him on the line as well, so make sure that we're chiming in here and really getting the discussion going. So Eric, HyTrust, you're a startup that's focused on secure virtualization management and compliance. And you've previously served in executive roles with Semaphore, Mailfronter, MySimon. You were a VC at Brentwood, Redpoint, Pinnacle, and you were an M&A at Robertson Stevens and Company. That's quite the mouthful. So I wanted to give a... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, but still not the resume that Mr. Hoff has.
Aww.
No, we're not competing.
Sweet. Well,
exactly.
One thing we do want to throw out there is that Cisco actually invested in HyTrust, correct?
Yeah, correct. That is correct. So thank you very much, Chris. Cisco is one of our investors. They invested in HyTrust in our last round of venture capital, along with our current investors, Trident Capital, and another new investor, Granite Ventures. So we're very excited to have them on board.
Great, great. Well, I'm going to start off with the tough question that most people are probably thinking. There are a lot of established virtualization, say that 10 times fast, solutions that are already in the market. And so HyTrust is a startup, so why would someone go with HyTrust and not one of the established players?
So when you think about virtualization security solutions that at least have been introduced in the market so far, most of them are focused on guest security, right? Securing the virtual machine, either through network-related type of security, such as VM firewalls or IDS, or trying to do something around antivirus at the hypervisor level rather than an agent within the guest operating system. HyTrust really looks at the world, and we started the company in thinking about what's the new thing in this picture when you think about the virtualized data center. And the new thing in the picture is really the hypervisor, right? The hypervisor, in the end, is just a distributed operating system, right? Probably the most successful OS deployed in a data center in the last 10 years. It enables a whole new set of capabilities, such as running multiple workloads on the same physical server, isolation, vMotion, HADR. But as any new operating system, right, it has its own challenges around security and compliance. And HyTrust focuses on security and compliance for the virtual infrastructure itself. So some of the aspects that we cover are around identity management, access control, audit logging, separation of duties, change control management and configuration, but specifically for the virtual infrastructure rather than the guests. And so that's where we're very uniquely positioned, and a big reason why Cisco invested in us. And Cisco is probably one of the leading companies behind the movement towards the dynamic virtualized data center. And the fit was definitely very, very good from the beginning, because as Cisco saw the, sort of unfolding of the dynamic data center and the fact that the rate of change is so much faster than a physical environment, probably an order or 2 orders of magnitude faster. There's no way you can manage that environment through traditional change control, right? In terms of manual processes. You have to manage that environment through automation and policy. And that's where HyTrust comes in.
All right. I'd like to jump over to Chris for 2 seconds. Chris, when you first saw HyTrust, what were your thoughts on it? What was your initial reaction?
It was actually before I was at Cisco, so I blogged on it. I thought it was a very, very elegant solution. I think that's actually how I described it, to a sticky set of problems relating to one of the bigger sets of challenges in virtualized environments, which is organizational and operational.
Right.
Specifically about regaining some of that separation of duties, and change control, and the ability to, for example, not have everybody be super user. Right. I want to be able to restrict access. I want to be able to control who can do what in an environment that is, by definition, built to be incredibly dynamic. And so there's a great solution. And when I came on board at Cisco, and shortly thereafter we invested in them, it was kind of it's like, yeah,
serendipitous.
I was right. So,
serendipitous. You figured it out yet again. So Eric, what are some of the challenges that you've seen so far when people are trying out the HyTrust appliance, just overall? I mean, whether it's the educational piece or the technology piece when they're migrating.
Yeah, so definitely the challenges we tend to see and the reasons why we're brought in are that, people are still fairly early in the movement towards virtualization. I think the current stats are somewhere around 20% virtualized, moving to 50% by 2012. And a lot of that today is low-hanging fruit, but a lot of companies, the vast majority, want to move towards a virtualized first model and to virtualize tier 1 applications. And along that journey, right, taking a VMware term in, a lot of times they hit challenges as it relates to virtualizing more sensitive workloads, things like PCI, things like Tier 1 applications and SOX applications and HIPAA, et cetera. And so, a lot of the areas that we address around compliance, access control, audit logging, et cetera, are key to allowing those companies to move forward with virtualization. And we see that the customers that we've been working with are extremely excited about HyTrust in really moving past those roadblocks and being able to virtualize more. And that's also why we have such a close relationship with VMware, is that we, in turn, help their customers enable more virtualization, right? And we empower their customers to virtualize securely.
How specifically are you addressing the regulations like PCI and SOX and HIPAA?
So we're very closely tied to those regulations. We are part of the PCI Council and have been part of the group shaping the requirements around virtualization. So a lot of the aspects that we're focused on are definitely key aspects around things like PCI and SOX and HIPAA. And it's really around a lot of the traditional IT controls that people are familiar with and they put in place in their physical infrastructure, and now they need to also think about and put in place in that virtual infrastructure, given the capabilities of virtualization and the fact that you actually have, in a sense, virtualized the entire data center in a software model. And you have so many different types of administrators involved, right? You have ESX admins or hypervisor admins, you have VM admins, you have network admins, storage admins, and now desktop admins. And you need to provide the ability to allow people to do only specific operations that they're allowed to and manage only specific resources that they're also allowed to as well.
You're making me think a lot right now about this whole thing between your virtualization and your IT teams. And do you have specific advice on how to resolve the issues that happen there from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, that's probably a very interesting point, because one of the analysts, I think at Gartner, Neil McDonald, writes about this, and the fact that only 40% of virtualization deployments have security involved in the architecture and rollout of virtualization. And that's, pretty surprising, although, not that surprising if you're very close to, the industry, which is that virtualization a lot of times grows out of things like test dev and in pocket deployments. And so people are focused on how can I get this thing up and running quickly, how can I make it more efficient, blah, blah, blah. And then people see the benefits, pretty quickly in terms of cost savings, HA, DR, et cetera, and then they want to expand virtualization very quickly. And a lot of times security not being involved in that conversation causes there to be an issue when it comes to, hey, we want to virtualize a DMZ application, or we want to virtualize a PCI-related application, et cetera. And then people are trying to then scramble to figure out how to put in the right level of controls and visibility into the environment that hasn't been there before. And you see a pretty tough organizational issue in terms of making those decisions and working collaboratively. The other organizational issue is, of course, the fact that you have all of these different administrators involved with virtualization, and the fact that the hypervisor is now the lowest point in the stack and virtualizes all of those other resources like networking and storage. And so the virtualization or the virtual infrastructure admin has now become sort of the king of the castle. Where maybe it used to be sometimes the network admins or different groups, and so getting that sort of power and the control back to the different groups so you have segregation of duties is a very important aspect to most companies as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, why don't we jump over for a brief moment here to your desktop so we can show a little bit of the product itself. Why don't we pull up my screen in the studio? Here we go, guys.
Perfect.
There we go.
So just to touch on, so HyTrust Appliance is a virtual appliance solution that provides policy management, unified access control, hypervisor hardening, and audit quality logging for VMware Virtual Infrastructure, longer-term cross-platform, and we provide that all in the network. So we don't have any agents on hosts or within virtual machines in any sort of, and we actually provide all of that as a network-based solution. So in terms of a demo, I can pull that up for you here. I'll actually just do a very short demo given the time we have. So I'll just show you the policy enforcement in action here.
Great.
So we're going to log into one of our ESX hosts, and we're going to log in as a network admin as the user Joe. And typically when you're managing hosts, usually most people log in as root. With HyTrust Appliance, given that we are a gateway for all the management traffic going to the hypervisor and to vCenter, we enforce policy for every operation. We also require centralized authentication for all users, and we audit log everything. So we're logging in as Joe, which is the person's AD username, and he's a network admin. So if Joe wants to do something network related, let's say he wants to look at the vSwitch configuration, you'll see he's allowed to do that. However, if Joe goes outside of his role level, let's say Joe wants to look at the hypervisor configuration, you see that he's blocked by HyTrust Appliance. So we've made a policy decision, We intercept, we proxy the command and the arguments. We make a policy decision whether Joe as a network admin is allowed to run ESX config-info. He's not, and we therefore deny that operation. Same thing as if Joe tries to perform an operation that's not in the whitelist for his role. And if you take a look at our built-in log viewer within the HyTrust Appliance, you see every operation that Joe just performed in that SSH session. So you'll see where he initially authenticated.
And also clearly gives warnings too.
Exactly. And you also see where he was able to run ESX config-vSwitch, so he's allowed to look at the vSwitch configuration on that specific host, and you actually have all the details around his AD username, his client IP address, the specific command, and the specific object that he's managing. And you also can see everything that he's also not allowed to do, such as looking at the running hypervisor configuration on that host. So everything is centrally authenticated. Everything is consistently applied in terms of policy, and everything is consistently audit logged in granular detail.
Nice.
So we're going to do the same thing in terms of connecting to one of our hosts, but this time we're going to use VMware's vSphere client. And we're going to connect to one of our ESXi hosts, and we're logging in again as that network admin, Joe.
Right.
And so the client will come up here in a second.
What if they logged in as Chris?
Chris has been revoked.
Warning.
So as a network admin, if Joe wants to do something such as power off this virtual machine called website.
Oh, can I jump in for 2 seconds, Eric? I've got a question from the chat room. Is there a top dashboard view?
Yes, there is. I can jump into that if there's an interest in seeing that. So we can do that.
We're kind of crunched for time, but let's go over like the last high point.
So so you see here that Joe's not allowed to power off that virtual machine called website because he's a network admin. He's not a virtual machine admin. And you see nothing shows up in the task window, so that command was proactively denied before it was allowed to happen. And you see that he's also, all of that activity in the vSphere client session is logged in granular detail to that user, Joe. And we can also show an allowed operation. And we'll go to the ESX host, and we'll make a network configuration change here. We'll maybe add a vSwitch.
It's really straightforward.
Yeah, and it's transparent. So your users don't even know HyTrust is there unless they either try to do something outside of their role or they try to manage a resource that they're not allowed to.
Great.
And so we'll finish up here in terms of adding that vSwitch. And so you see that that's a network-related operation, so it's allowed to complete just fine. And, of course, Joe can also remove that vSwitch as well. And we log all of that detail in our audit quality logs as well. And we have a very rich policy interface where you can define very granular roles in terms of the user, and you can define object-level policies in terms of which resources they're allowed to manage. And we have a label-based approach that allows you to categorize your entire environment so that policies are inferred by your label. So you can label things production, test dev, PCI, et cetera, and we enforce policy correctly, including things like network segment control. So we make sure that all the great port groups that Nexus 1000V and VMware VDS provide, we make sure the right VMs connect to the right networks.
Great. Last thing, what's the pricing model? Because I noticed on this site there are a few different options.
So we have two different versions of HyTrust Appliance. We have our Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. The pricing is by CPU socket of each host we protect, $500 per CPU socket for Standard, $750 per CPU socket for Enterprise. And the Enterprise Edition includes a number of enterprise scale functionalities such as federation, two-factor authentication, a remote API for automation of HyTrust Appliance, as well as root password vaulting. So we take over the root password and we secure it, we rotate it, we allow it to be checked out for one-time use, etc. We also have an entirely free community edition of HyTrust Appliance that has all of the capabilities in our Standard Edition, except it only protects up to 3 ESX hosts. And we have probably over 600 or 700 people who have downloaded and run our community edition. And so we invite anybody who's interested to
go where?
Download it and keep it. So they can just go to our website and go to community and go to resources. And they'll find it right there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. Wish we had more time, but Eric Chiu with HyTrust. Make sure that you check them out, HyTrust.com. And also, you're on Twitter, at HyTrust, and also at mchiu, E-M-C-H-I-U. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. I believe I'm starting to hear thunder. Am I?
I feel like standing like this.
Me
I wonder
too.
why. Ready, shield maiden? Time
I'm
to
ready.
do a Storm on Demand. Storm on Demand. Get out your Storm flagons, your Storm guys, and get your Storm on. Storm on Demand is infrastructure as a service, cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. Proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years. That's 2 with a 1.
When did you
years
become English?
of experience. Is it English? It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Actually, I'm going to break character for a moment here, my English character. We saw earlier in the chat room that Travis Stoliker from Storm on Demand said that Cloud Harmony found that Storm on Demand was 50% faster and half the cost than Amazon's highest performing server.
Wow.
Which is pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. And Cloud Harmony is pretty well known for doing these studies, so congratulations. So back to character. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2, 57% faster. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, X-Ray Vision, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and much, much more. Storm on Demand is at stormondemand.com. And you can thank them at Storm on Demand on Twitter.
At Storm on Demand.
That's right. That's right.
And you may just get little men.
You might.
Little men.
No promises, but you might.
Yeah.
Not leprechauns, but
No,
Storm
little
on Demand.
men. Storm on Demand men.
Yeah.
Love Storm on Demand. So that pretty much wraps things up. I think we've had a great show.
It was a really good show.
So thank you to Chris Hoff with Cisco. You can follow him on Twitter at Beaker.
Oh, don't do that.
I'm doing that.
Yeah,
I am doing that, and you are blushing, mister.
I am blushing.
But yes, make sure that you follow Chris Hoff at Cisco and also Eric Chiu with HyTrust, EMCHIU, Chiu on Twitter. So thanks, guys. Great having you on the show today.
Thanks.
And
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
always a pleasure. And of course, Verticore, Storm on Demand, NetDNA. It's at Verticore, at Storm on Demand, at NetDNA CDN.
Yep.
Our wonderful sponsors of This Week in Cloud Computing. Could not do this without them. They support new media, which we appreciate.
Yes,
so
very much.
Thank them on Twitter, thank them wherever you need to, but thank our sponsors. Ideas for the show? Send them to either Amanda at thisweekend.com or pitch at thisweekend.com, and we will certainly get those, especially if you have conferences coming up, discount codes. We love those to give away. Let us know. But that pretty much wraps it up. Next week, same time, different place for me because I will be coming to you from Maine. Same time, same cloud channel. I am Amanda, and this is This Week in Cloud Computing.